Cat April Waters with 2 T's for peoplesinternetradio.com, which is based in Ireland and gets listeners throughout Ireland, the UK, Canada, and the US. Hello, Sal Mo Salar on People's Internet Radio chat, who's saying hello. I was able to kind of put a last minute show together. Pretty good. I'm glad I have 3 guests. Barbara Honegger, who I've interviewed many times before, has served in high-level positions in the U.S. government, including the White House policy analyst, special assistant to the president, and director of the Attorney General's Law Review at the Department of Justice. From 95 to 2011, you also served as a senior military affairs journalist at the Department of Defense's Naval Postgraduate School. And you're the author of the legendary book, October Surprise, which covered the deep story behind the Iran-Contra scandal and ultimately led to a full subpoena power congressional investigation funded at the level of the 9/11 Commission. And I'll stop reading there because we might go over time, even though we do have like extra time. And David R. Meiswinkle, JD, you're a licensed attorney in New Jersey since 1989 and a practicing criminal defense attorney for over a decade. You presently are the president and a board member of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and also a retired police officer of 23 years, a United States Army veteran. In 2009, you ran as an independent against Chris Christie for governor and was the only candidate who spoke about the need for a new 9/11 investigation. In 2010, you ran as an independent for Congress against Chris Smith, again exposing the need for a new 9/11 investigation. And Mick Harrison, I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself, Mick? Because
Sure, can. No problem. So I'm a public interest lawyer. I started out my law career after having been a teacher of mathematics for 10 years. And I started at the Government Accountability Project in DC, which is a nonprofit that represents whistleblowers. I've been doing government oversight, whistleblower protection, environmental enforcement for citizens for about 26, 27 years now. And I'm the litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry.
And so we're going to talk about today yesterday's filing and the news conference, because you and David are bringing a lawsuit, and the lawyers for the 9/11 Inquiry are bringing a lawsuit against the FBI.
That is correct.
And can you just tell us why?
Well, I'll start, and maybe my colleagues can add their perspectives. The short version is that the Congress imposed a duty on the FBI a few years ago in 2014 to assess any evidence regarding the 9/11 attacks that was not considered by the original 9/11 Commission. And in our investigation and in reviewing the report that came out of the FBI's attempt to respond to that congressional mandate, and that report came out in 2015, and it was done by a commission chaired by Ed Meese, and it was called the 9/11 Review Commission. But in our review of that report, it was apparent that the FBI and its new commission had ignored several major categories of evidence related to 9/11 that had never been addressed by the original commission. One of those, probably the best known category of evidence, is the demolition of 3 World Trade Center buildings on 9/11. So our suit is intended to compel the FBI to go back and do their homework and do a real assessment of 7 categories of evidence regarding 9/11 and report that to Congress.
And there was something that the FBI had omitted, wasn't there?
Yeah, 7 entire categories of evidence. I can list them for you if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay, so the first category is the evidence of the use of explosives to bring down the Twin Towers and Building 7 on 9/11. That's category one. The second category has to do with a group of folks who were arrested on 9/11. The FBI calls them the high fivers. They're self-identified Israelis who were observed and were photographing themselves celebrating the attacks on the Twin Towers as they happened. And a lot of interesting details came out of the FBI interrogation of those 5 individuals. So that's category two. Category 3 has to do with the destruction of records related to, we're getting some background noise there, some destruction of records related to the high fivers evidence. And to make a long story short, when we did a FOIA request, Freedom of Information request to the FBI, they gave us a response back indicating that, strangely enough, the same month that the new FBI commission was created, they destroyed records responsive to our FOIA request regarding the high fivers. So that's count 3. Count 4 has to do with Saudi and other international funding and support for the hijackers and evidence thereof. Count 5 has to do with videos from the Pentagon that no one's ever seen and the surrounding area. Count 6 has to do with the evidence collected of airplane parts and airplane wreckage at the 3 crash sites. And count 7, the last, has to do with the phone calls made or reported to have been made from the airplanes during the 9/11 attacks. So those are the categories we're seeking an order from the federal court to compel the FBI to assess and report to Congress.
Okay, so David Meiswinkle, talk about yesterday's press conference.
All right. It was a very successful press conference. It's down in Washington, D.C. It was right next to the museum, which is on Pennsylvania Avenue, a few blocks from the Capitol. You see the Capitol right down the street. And Richard Gage is there, and Bob McIlvaine, and Mick and myself were the speakers. There was a group there that videotaped it and supported it. We were there for at least an hour and a half talking. Wow. So there's a lot of videotape that'll come out of that, and productions are being made right now in edits and things of that nature. Jason Goodman was there. He recorded it too. He videotaped it. This is I would say, landmark for the Lawyers Committee and maybe for any litigation in this country regarding this issue. I don't think that anybody would have considered suing under the statute, the Administrative Procedures Act. Mick drafted the complaint, did an excellent job. There was a lot of input from people, including Barbara Honegger and others. What it does is that it basically changes a lot of energies here. As you know, last year we filed a grand jury petition, basically asking the government or asking the U.S. Attorney to do his responsibility, and that's to call a special grand jury based on what we say the dispositive, conclusive evidence of pre-planted explosives in the Twin Tower complex that was responsible for the buildings, North and South Tower, giants over 1,000 feet, and Building 7, which itself was 610 feet, 47 stories, to be exploded down. In other words, there was bombs in there, and that's the substance of the grand jury petition. Now, this takes another step beyond. This is actual litigation. This is going to court and suing, and who are suing is the FBI and the Department of Justice, and as Mick said, is for not doing their job. Simple as that. Exactly. They had a responsibility to assess certain evidence. They didn't do it.
Right.
And it could never be reviewed as a result. So it's, as I said, landmark in the sense that it goes beyond the pre-planted explosives at the Twin Towers and then at the World Trade Center complex. As Mick mentioned, It now deals with evidence having to do with the high fivers and what's the implications of that. It takes us back in part to the Saudi connection and the financing there. It goes into the plane parts. It's really interesting and starts to connect all the sites together, because a lot of people may not know those parts. A lot of those parts have serial numbers on, and the serial numbers can be tracked or identify the plane. And so we can then have positive identification on what plane hit what building. And in particular, you may know that there's a lot of controversy over what happened at the Pentagon.
Right.
And that would be very pertinent evidence that should be reviewed and certainly certified or given to the 9/11 Commission that they never considered. It's information that was never officially considered by the commission that sat between 2002 2004, the Kane-Hamilton Commission, the Zelikow Commission, whatever you want to call it. And there are other areas like Mick was talking about, the cell phone communication. But there's been a big change in how that was being presented, from all these cell phones to now airphones, and a very mysterious call involving the Solicitor General's wife, Barbara Olson, which now is totally minimized, and basically say that we really never went through. On zero, I think 0 seconds recorded, and of course there was contrary testimony or statements from her husband. I think he said he had 4 calls from her, and then there's the evidence having to do with cameras in the Pentagon, mounted in the Pentagon and around the Pentagon. We all have a tendency to talk about the 85 videos outside the Sheraton Hotel, the Citgo station, etc. But to our knowledge, no one's addressed, and certainly the FBI hasn't assessed the photos inside and around the Pentagon, at least as far as we know. And certainly it was never presented to Congress, any of that information that we know. And certainly the 9/11 Commission didn't consider it, as far as we know. So that's some of the different areas with regards to the high fivers or the celebration. And apparently, foreknowledge, you could argue, that they say this, hey, this looks like somebody knew what was going on. They set up on top of a moving van in New Jersey, and then they were arrested later that day. Now, there was photographs that Mick mentioned that were destroyed. We know for a fact that the state police in New Jersey developed 76 photos in 3 sets, 8 by 10. And we know there was also tests having to do with an explosive residue that was identified by a dog, a police dog, that was sent through there, tested positive for explosive residue on the blanket and on the fabric. Now, we don't know what the results are, but we know that fairly certain that the 9/11 Commission was never advised of any of this information, and it was never properly assessed. So it's very thrilling in a sense that we are taking a step forward, and the complaint is, I believe, it's a very strong complaint, it's well drafted, and it's a novelty in a sense that it's never been done before. And we expect that the Lawyers Committee, as we proceed forward, that there'll be a lot of things that have never been done before. We just hope that your audience and other people out there can get to supporting us. They can do so by sending some contribution or contacting us at lc4for911.org. It's lc4for911.org. Thank you. I'm sure now Barbara has a lot of things to say, and maybe you should turn to her.
Barbara, what is your role in this lawsuit, Barbara?
Okay, well, I'll answer that. I want to make a couple of comments on the previous comments first, if I could.
Sure.
Well, people should know that in your introduction of myself, I'm also on the board of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. There are 9 of us on the board, including Ed Asner, by the way, very famous activist, political activist, human rights, civil rights activist, is our executive director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. So I'm on the board of the Lawyers Committee. And I also worked very, very hard and long with Mick and Dave on the complaint that was just filed yesterday. So that's my role. I also do background research for the Lawyers Committee, including for the complaint and the grand jury petition. What I wanted to mention is the most important big picture to me is that no one will ever again be able to claim, well, they'll claim, but they won't be able to substantiate their claim in any way again, that we are conspiracy theorists. And the reason for that is, as Dave Weiswinkle, our president of the Lawyers Committee, likes to say, we are now inside the castle and the drawbridge has been lifted. There's nothing they can do anymore to successfully label us as conspiracy theorists, because these are conspiracy facts.
Right.
The conspiracy facts are now being presented to a special criminal grand jury in Manhattan, in the federal court system in Manhattan. Our grand jury petition was first filed last April 10th of 2018. And to our great and positive surprise, on November 7th, we received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, electronically signed by the U.S. Attorney himself, Geoffrey Berman, and actually signed by the head of the Counterterrorism Division for the U.S. courthouse in Manhattan, which is the federal jurisdiction for the attacks at Ground Zero, the World Trade Center and World Trade Center 7 on 9/11. So we received a letter letting the Lawyers Committee know, to our great positive surprise, that the U.S. Attorney would be convening a special criminal grand jury and present our evidence in our grand jury petition, which you can read by going to our website, lc4for911.org. That's lc4911.org. So we're inside the castle with a special criminal grand jury convened just for that purpose. It's ongoing. And we don't know if it's actually physically been convened yet, but after over 4 months, we can reasonably predict that it has been. But the importance of what happened yesterday in Washington, D.C., when Mick Harrison filed our complaint, our lawsuit against the FBI for basically the massive cover-up of who the real conspirators are on 9/11. And it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. These are conspiracy facts.
Right.
And you can read the complaint by going to either our website, lc4911.org, or the Architects and Engineers for 911Truth website, which is AE911Truth.org. And you'll be able to find easily where to read our 40-page complaint that Mick filed yesterday with the federal court, the district court in Washington, D.C., federal court. Now, why does this matter compared to the complaint? It matters because they support one another, they reinforce one another. But the really important thing about this complaint, in addition to its content, which everyone needs to read, is the fact that it's public. The grand jury proceeding in Manhattan is secret. Grand juries are secret. They're secret proceedings, and we may not know anything at all about what they are doing unless and until there are actual indictments that come out of the grand jury. And that would be well down the road. I think federal grand juries could be originally convened for 18 months. And so we would still have 14 months ahead of us. And they can also be extended by the judge in the court, federal court. So what we did yesterday was to file publicly. And even though our petition is public, we don't know what's happening inside the grand jury in Manhattan. But unless Mick corrects me or Dave corrects me, I believe that everything, unless for some reason it's sealed by the judge, I believe everything in this federal lawsuit we just filed against the FBI and the Department of Justice against the Attorney General, William Barr, yesterday, will be public.
So
that's what matters.
Right. It's against William P. Barr, Attorney General of the United States and the Department of Justice, and Christopher A. Wray, Director of the FBI, from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and Bob McIlvaine, who's the father. He lost his son, and he was also speaking at the press conference yesterday, and he was speaking about how his son was a silent witness because the evidence that his son's body clearly portrayed was that the official story, of course, could not possibly be right, and the prior explosions, his son died from explosions before the two twin towers were hit by a plane. Who would like to respond to that?
Well, I would like, before, just one more sentence, I would like
Okay.
people to know, I don't believe Mick or Dave mentioned it, that the entire press conference yesterday in Washington, D.C., right after Mick filed our lawsuit against the FBI and the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, can be viewed online. I don't know if it's on the Lawyers Committee website yet, but it is on the Architects and Engineers website.
Yeah.
So if you just go to AE911Truth.org, and what you're showing on the screen now, Kat, is if you go to the main page of Architects and Engineers and scroll down a little bit, you'll get to that. You'll get to the video, and just click on the arrow in the middle of the video.
Oh, yeah.
But do go first to 53 minutes and 5 seconds, about 53 minutes exactly into it, to first view the formal press conference, and then at the end of the videotape, you can go back to the beginning and go up to that point and see the more informal discussion for the first 53 minutes.
Kat, Mick and Bob McIlvaine and myself, we went down together, and of course Bob was with us, and I'm sure that Mick would agree with me that Bob gives great inspiration to the 9/11 cause. I mean, the man suffered the greatest loss he can suffer, the loss of a child he loved dearly, and he's a stalwart. This takes the toll on him to go to these events. It's not easy for him. I mean, it's become pretty apparent. He's very strong internally, and he's dedicated to see it through, to try and get truth and justice, despite sometimes the insensitivities in our society and the obtuseness and the apathy and the lack of focus on important issues. So just to have Bob there, that's the credibility for me.
Yeah.
That's ultimate credibility, is to have Bob McIlvaine at your event, at the event, and have him a plaintiff here in the lawsuit, this lawsuit, and to have Richard Gage with us and on the lawsuit too. What credibility? What more credibility can you have? The guy spent the last 10 years. He's the most foremost expert on the evidence at Ground Zero, evidence that the Lawyers Committee was fortunate enough to have available to package and to put into the legal form and get into the grand jury system, to the U.S. Attorney, and which is the front and center first count of this complaint. So you had like incredible stalwarts, and you had, and Nick Harrison's amazing.
Yeah.
25 years as a public interest attorney, drafting this complaint, and a complaint that historically takes this whole 9/11 investigation or 9/11 experience to another level. And we hope, as the Lawyers Committee, that we can continue on and go to other levels, take more steps. But this step yesterday, to think that Bob McIlvaine was there, and Mick Harrison was there, and Richard Gage was there, and this was filed in Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah.
National capital. And as I said, we were right there, almost in the shadows of the Capitol, a few blocks away on Pennsylvania Avenue, when we gave this press conference. So it bodes well if, I think people are ready for the truth, in the sense that maybe they weren't before, for a lot of different reasons. And we appreciate you having us on the show, and and putting the truth out. I appreciate how you began the show with John Lennon and his search for truth.
Yeah.
And so it was very significant. Bob is very significant, important in the 9/11 movement. So
I mean, I just wanted to, quickly say that there never really was a proper investigation of the events of 9/11.
no, it's a whitewash. I mean, let's speak for myself. That's not official. I don't think the lawyers committee is taking that official position, but you can ask Nick or Barbara. We can speak individually too. No, it was a disgrace, a national disgrace.
Yeah.
And there's been national disgraces on most of these type of investigations, going back to John Kennedy and others since then that I know of in my lifetime. But no, I think it's a national disgrace, and I think one day it will be shown to be a national disgrace if we can proceed accordingly and unravel it as best we can. And if people become more alert and more aware and more supportive in different ways, as I said, they can support us through LC4FOR911.org. But just to tell your friends, hey, look at this video, or even ask them the question. I showed them a video maybe a couple of years ago they wouldn't watch on 9/11 and see that, hey, maybe they'll watch it now. And those little things maybe seem so imperceptible, but they're not. They add up, and can be a shift in attitude and change and conviction and courage. And it takes some courage for people to go forward and break out of their doldrums of their structures that are locked into mentally. But this issue can do it. And again, you have Barbara Honecker, amazing. You tracked her back to Iran-Contra, and before that. I mean, just think that she's editing Mick's draft. What a good person to have as a backdrop, and she's did stuff that no doubt got to the President of the United States. So that's the quality in this group we have, a lawyers committee. We have people from different backgrounds, but they all bring something to the table. And to me, it's like a real true round table, and that everyone sits at it, in that way. And it's quite an organization, and so maybe Mick can comment on some further things in reference to Bob McIlvaine and what that meant to him, being with Bob yesterday and the last 2 days actually with Bob McIlvaine.
Can I ask Mick Harrison to maybe we'll kind of just talk a little bit about the 7 points that the FBI omitted? I mean, clearly something is awry here. It's quite obvious. Not to mention the fact that why doesn't anybody know about Building 7? Why does most of the public not even know? Why is that not reported? Why was it not on the media? Maybe can Mick Harrison, can you maybe speak about that?
Sure. It is. It does go to the heart of what this complaint is about. This is essentially a lawsuit to promote transparency regarding the facts of 9/11. Unlike our petition to the U.S. Attorney for the grand jury that Barb mentioned, and our supplement to that petition, which we haven't talked about yet, which goes more to information about witnesses and who may have material information to help get to the bottom of the crimes that we documented in our petition. This lawsuit is a little different. What we're basically doing is trying to solve the problem, Kat, that you just described, which is, the public is still in the dark and people don't realize it, but it's not just the public. The Congress is pretty much still in the dark. And the Congress decided in 2013, 2014, that they didn't want to be in the dark. They issued this public law, which required the FBI to report an independent assessment back to Congress of any evidence regarding the 9/11 attacks not considered by the original commission. So the Congress wanted to be updated and get the full story, and I give them credit for that. Now, the reason a lot of folks are still in the dark, including a lot of Congress members, is that the FBI isn't doing its job, and the Department of Justice isn't requiring the FBI to do its job. So, and I'll speak to these categories of evidence you ask, but the the short version is, we're in this lawsuit. We're basically trying to get a court to order the FBI to do its job as the Congress directed. Now, in terms of the specifics, the first category of evidence that was omitted from the 2015 report of the FBI's 9/11 Review Commission is what we call the controlled demolition evidence, the evidence regarding pre-placed explosives and incendiaries used at the World Trade Center on 9/11 to destroy three towers, the two Twin Towers and Building 7, and unfortunately with, a very tragic, considerable loss of life. And I'm sure the Congress would like to know just to what extent that evidence is valid. I mean, Richard Gage and his colleagues and a number of independent scientists, Stephen Jones, Kevin Ryan, Niels Harrig, go down the list, have proven beyond any reasonable doubt that those buildings were demolished by use of explosives. The Lawyers Committee has drawn the same conclusion from our review of that evidence. So, and the Congress is still in the dark on what all that evidence is and how it should be properly interpreted. So this lawsuit in count 1 is intended to force the FBI to, through an independent commission, report that evidence of the use of explosives, which we have provided already to the U.S. Attorney, but we're willing to provide to the federal court, and report that evidence to Congress with the FBI's external panel's assessment of it. And if they were to do that, which they were ordered to do in 2014 by the Congress, then some of this, living in the dark phenomena that you described, Kat, correctly, would be remedied. Now, the second category of evidence is not as well known as the demolition evidence. And as you know, Kat, there's still a lot of people who are unaware of a significant part of even the demolition evidence, including Building 7. But the high fivers evidence, which is category 2, count 2, has to do with 5 individuals arrested on 9/11 after citizens reported observing them photographing each other celebrating the attacks on the Trade Center at the time. And they were tracked down and arrested on 9/11. They were held for quite some time, weeks if not months, by the FBI, interrogated at length. And there were FBI officials who were convinced that they had something to do with the 9/11 attacks. They were eventually released and sent back to Israel. They were self-identified Israelis. And they've been reported, I believe they self-reported on a television program that they were in the U.S. to document the event, referring to the 9/11 attacks. So whether they're, we're not saying they're guilty of any particular crime, but they clearly had some information.
Right.
Apparently some advanced information. And the Congress needs to know that. The American people need to know that. And the FBI has several hundred pages of records regarding these individuals, which the original 9/11 Commission did not consider, and which the new 2015 9/11 Review Commission set up by the FBI did not address or assess. So, the FBI has these records. We have them now, although they're heavily redacted. But the public, most of the public still doesn't know about it, and the Congress doesn't know about it. So count 2 of our lawsuit is meant to remedy that particular part of this lack of information problem and shine some light on, another significant aspect of these crimes. And if you wish, I can go through the other categories. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Sure. I have no problem with it, Barbara or David.
No, go ahead, Mick. Continue. Sure.
So the third category is related to the high fivers evidence. I mentioned it briefly. We have a letter from the FBI indicating that they destroyed records regarding the high fivers, apparently the photographs, which are quite significant evidence. And they did this the very month that the FBI itself created this 9/11 Review Commission on orders of Congress, which we find highly suspicious timing. And that probably doesn't require much more elaboration. And what we're hoping to do is to get the court to order the FBI to go back and see if they can recover those files, hoping they haven't been permanently destroyed. And if not, to see if they can reconstruct them in some way. Sometimes you can reconstruct files if they've been emailed to folks over time, and even though you destroyed your own copies. So we hope to get those photographs and other evidence back into the hands of Congress and the American people, even though apparently the FBI has attempted to destroy it. So the fourth category has to do with the support and financing of the hijackers, or the alleged hijackers, and two of them in particular who worked out of the West Coast, and including San Diego and Los Angeles. And that topic is becoming better known because of the lawsuit for the 9/11 families against the Saudis, which is ongoing litigation in federal court in New York. And one of our accounts, count 4 in this complaint, talks about evidence that the original 9/11 Commission did not consider, and that the new 2015 FBI 9/11 Commission did not assess. And that had to do with what the FBI, or the DOJ, I should say, the Department of Justice, is calling 3 tranches, TRANCHES, 3 tranches of documents that they possess related to support for the hijackers, which they're just now having reviewed for privilege and for classified status to see if they can be declassified, because they're considering giving these documents to the plaintiffs, the 9/11 families, in the Saudi lawsuit. And that seems to me to be appropriate. However, these same documents need to be given to the Congress and to the American people generally. And so count 4 of our lawsuit is intended to force the FBI, through report order, to assess and report to Congress any documents in these 3 tranches of records that are describing that the 9/11 Commission originally never considered. And I can tell you from reading the new Commission's report in 2015 that they were not considered, at least in any comprehensive sense, in the new report either. So that's another area where we're trying to shine some light by way of a federal court order to get some transparency on everything that happened during the 9/11 attacks. The fifth category of evidence we've already discussed to some extent, but we're trying to get a full disclosure of all the video evidence regarding the Pentagon. That would include video from cameras placed on the Pentagon. It also would include video from cameras within a 1-mile radius around the Pentagon. We know from a FOIA request by Gene Laratonda, concerned citizen, that the FBI has acknowledged having 13 compact disc CDs full of video evidence, which they're contemplating but haven't yet disclosed in response to a FOIA request. And they have at least 100 videos within a 1-mile radius of the Pentagon taken on 9/11. So we're trying to get all that evidence assessed, reported to Congress, and by way of that, shared with the American people. The sixth category has to do with airplane parts and wreckage and the assessment of that evidence. Normally when an airplane crashes, the NTSB comes in and does a reconstruction, attempts to collect all the plane parts and sort of do their best to reconstruct the damaged crashed aircraft and see what happened. That process was circumvented in the case of 9/11, and we have not seen any assessment like that. The FBI has the evidence. I mean, we know, you've probably seen those photographs of lines of FBI agents walking across the lawn of the Pentagon or the field in Shanksville,
Right.
And picking up all this evidence. So the Congress needs to have that evidence assessed, because if you go back to the original 9/11 Commission, you won't see any detailed assessment of all that evidence. And Congress ordered the FBI to assess any evidence not already considered by the 9/11 Commission. This category falls into that mandate. So we're trying to get an order on that evidence as well. And the last has to do with the calls made or reported to have been made on 9/11 from the aircraft. Without belaboring it, and Davis touched on it, there has been an ongoing controversy, even within the 9/11 Truth community, about the ability of cell phones in 2001 to have had any sort of sustained calls from aircraft at altitude. And the 9/11 Commission did acknowledge several calls from passengers as if all that data provided to them from the FBI at that time, and the FBI is the one who had the phone records. The 9/11 Commission pretty much took the original FBI representations as gospel. An example of that are the 4 calls that the 9/11 Commission said occurred between Ted Olson, the Solicitor General at that time, and his wife, Barbara, who was on the Flight 77 that is reported to have hit the Pentagon. So the problem with that is that 2 years later in the Moussaoui trial, the same agency that we're suing, the FBI, who had provided the data to the 9/11 Commission, which led the 9/11 Commission to talk about these 4 Olson calls. In the Moussaoui trial, the FBI said there were no calls connected, 0 calls connected between Barbara Olson and her husband, Ted Olson, the Solicitor General, and the one attempt that they recognized did not connect and was for 0 seconds. That contradiction is a dramatic one. And the evidence that the FBI relied on for the Moussaoui trial to take that position with the federal court there is it has not been reported to Congress. It hasn't been assessed by the new commission for the FBI, and it was never known to the original commission. So this gives you an idea of why we're suing and what we're suing about. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Who would like to answer like the significance of Building 7? Because again, like a lot of people don't know about it. What does the clear demolition of Building 7 and that how does that implicate what happened to the other 2 buildings, and the fact, right, that most people don't know, that's kind of like the smoking gun. I feel like.
Yeah. So we like to say I like to say there's a number of smoking guns, but that's probably the biggest.
Yeah.
That was not a little building.
Right.
That was 610 feet tall, approximately 47 stories, would be the biggest building in 33 states. For 2.3 seconds, it fell at free fall rate. That was for over 100 feet as it was going down. It's really impossible for that to happen for any kind of free fall. Eventually, when David Chandler, who did the geometry and the math and exposed the NIST report, they actually corrected their report, but they admitted they couldn't explain the free fall. Well, architects and engineers can explain the free fall, and lawyers committee for 9/11 Inquiry can explain the free fall. That's because the building was exploded down. When you explode a building down, you can account for free fall. If there's pre-planted explosives there and bombs, when 118 firemen say in the buildings they experienced bombs, when there's seismic reports that indicate at least the 2 towers, there was explosions in the basement or in the building before the planes even hit and before the buildings collapsed. When you have witnesses, other lay witnesses that saw explosions in the building. So when the Building 7 is declared to be down, a BBC report with Jane Stanley, and when it's standing in back of her on a live shot, it hadn't collapsed yet.
Right.
No reason for it to collapse. It's never happened before in the history of steel structured buildings that ever one collapsed because of fire, or even for fire induced by jet fuel, because it just can't heat hot enough to melt steel. You need at least 1,000 degrees to start to melt the steel. So for those reasons, what you saw and what we all saw was the impossibility, the absolute impossibility in future years. People will say that, it was impossible for Building 7 to fall. It wasn't even hit by an airplane, just office fires that really weren't hot. Normal office fires are probably 400 or 500 degrees. So for those reasons, and Barbara and Mick may have comment on Building 7, but it is a perfect controlled demolition. The other 2 buildings are obviously, you can see the explosions. You can see that the movement outward horizontally, not downward necessarily, horizontally. But you can also see in a different way, Building 7, you can still see the the center of the building start to go, and you could see it go down. And again, a free fall for part of it, and nearly free fall for all of it into its own footprint perfectly. It takes a lot of skill to do that. It takes a lot of time to do that. And it takes access to those buildings to be able to set charges up, etc. So Building 7 is ripe for investigation. That alone can open up everything. And that's part of our count. The first count there having to do with pre-planted explosives that architects and engineers have been talking about for all these years, and which is the centerpiece of the grand jury petition, having to do with those explosions. And certainly Building 7 is a key, as you mentioned, Kat. It's really a key to unraveling all of this.
I would like to comment.
Sure.
If I could.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I just, it's obvious the smoking gun of World Trade Center 7, and architects and engineers rightly focuses on that, in addition to the Twin Towers, of course. But I would just like to make clear, and this is what I'm about to mention as what I consider actually even a stronger smoking gun, but certainly of equal smokingness. And this is in both the grand jury petition and in our complaint against the lawsuit against the FBI and the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, that was filed in DC court, federal court yesterday. And that is the other major smoking gun, in my opinion. And there are many, but at the very top of the list, unlike World Trade Center 7, though, it's very important, I would put, because it's the first attack of 9/11. And that is, we have absolute proof that there was a massive deep basement explosion with pre-placed explosives in World Trade Center 1 basement before the plane hit. And likewise, there was a basement explosion in World Trade Center 2 before the plane hit. Now, because they're pre-placed explosives and they're both before the plane hit, and that is substantiated by a professional forensic seismic analyst, Professor Rousseau, in both our grand jury petition exhibits and also in the evidentiary count 1 that was filed in the federal court in our complaint, in our suit against the FBI and the Department of Justice and Attorney General yesterday in Washington, D.C. on March 25th, 2019. It is a critical fact, because anybody knows, anybody on the street, anybody in a kindergarten class knows that any alleged hijackers, even if they ever got on the plane, and there's a whole book that gives the documented evidence that not a single one of the alleged hijackers got on any of the planes on 9/11. But even if they did, and even if they were on the planes, or even if they weren't on the plane, even if the planes were remote controlled, the plane impacts couldn't have caused something that happened 14 to 15 seconds before the plane even hit in the deep basement of World Trade Center 1, and 17 seconds before the plane even hit with an explosion in the deep basement of World Trade Center 2. To me, those are the real smoking guns, as well as World Trade Center 7.
Isn't it also World Trade Center 6? Or,
right, all of the World Trade Center buildings were significantly destroyed,
like
including
like
explosion cavities in there.
There's a photograph. Sorry, there's a photograph of World Trade Center 6 with a gaping sub-basement hole from a.
That's right.
And what was World Trade Center 6? Wasn't something being held there? Like important.
I'm not sure which, if it was 4 or 6, that there was reportedly gold that was removed.
Right. I thought it was 6. That's kind of
so.
Yeah. That's where I was going. And again, just to kind of go back to what Bob McIlvaine was saying during the press conference, right? That took extensive preparation for the explosions and to take down those 3 buildings that Muslim hijackers would not have been able to pull off.
Exactly. And when folks, and I hope every one of your listeners and viewers does, go to the Architects and Engineers website and just scroll down on the main page till you get to the video of yesterday's press conference, right after Mick filed our lawsuit against the FBI and the Attorney General. Watch that, go to 53 minutes in to the beginning of the formal press conference. And what you're going to see there is that a bit into it, Bob McIlvaine explains why he knows. Now he says, I know 100%, and I agree with him, but he gives the evidence from the report of the autopsy report of his son. He gives the reason that he believes or knows 100% that his son Bobby was killed by a massive explosion in the lobby of World Trade Center 1, almost as he put his hand on the door to go in, the big glass door to go into the lobby, because that huge explosion, that pressure wave, burst the glass hit his head and his upper torso, instantly killed him and threw him back away from the building. And his body was found shortly after the attack on World Trade Center 1 and immediately taken to the hospital in the morgue. So it may be that Bobby McIlvaine was the first individual, the first casualty, the first death of 9/11 to be taken. And so Bob is certain, after looking at the evidence and talking to the people who viewed his body and seeing some of the photographs of his lower torso, he is certain himself that his son, Bobby McIlvaine, was killed by the pre-plane impact on World Trade Center 1, which was from the basement up and burst at least some of the elevator doors open. That huge fireball and pressure wave came up from the basement, up the elevator shafts, and into the lobby, burst the glass out of the lobby, and some of that glass killed his son.
Right. Does anybody have anything to add? Mick or David?
I think we've covered it pretty well. I do want to say I've been honored to represent Bob McIlvaine. I agree with David that he's very inspiring and has obviously a tragic story, but he's had the courage to keep telling it.
Yeah.
And he's telling it, not just for his own purposes, but to help the American people come to grips with the truth for all the families that were impacted. So I admire him, and it's clear it's been at some cost to himself. So I respect him for his commitment.
Mick, could you let us know if Bob McIlvaine is the only 9/11 family member who's a plaintiff?
Well, no. I mean, yes, I can let you know, and no, he's not. There will be probably two others added when we amend the complaint. There were a couple folks we were communicating with, and because of logistics, their name does not show up on the initially filed complaint. But we do have commitments from a couple others, family members. We didn't really do an outreach to family members. We just had a couple folks indicate they wanted to be plaintiffs in the suit. So we certainly are honored to have them join us.
Okay, and I would like to remind everybody that Architects and Engineers and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry have, as of yesterday, initiated a 3-week until the middle of April, till April 15th, a 3-week joint fundraising drive to raise funds for the new FBI lawsuit, to see it through. The first phase is to see it through the expected motion to dismiss. Hopefully we won't get one, but we expect to. And we have to pay our attorneys, and we have a co-counsel in Washington, D.C. Mick Harrison is working with. Our litigation director, Mick Harrison, has a co-counsel. He must be paid. So please support us, and you can do that by donating. Either, it's obvious how to donate, either at the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 website, which is AE911Truth.org, or of course at our Lawyers Committee website, which is LC4FOR911.org. Thank you for anything you can contribute. It will really matter.
I just quickly wanted to, remind people, not that they need reminding, but some people do, of the cost of 9/11 and 18 endless wars of the supposed war on terror that was based purely on lies and this weapons of mass destruction that wasn't. And no one, George W. Bush was never held accountable for, no one is ever held accountable for, misinformation, lies that triggered this stuff, and it's still ongoing and no end in sight, really.
Well, you're right, 100%, and that's why this litigation is so important. Is it's trying to reverse the trend. If we can reverse the trend, then those areas you just mentioned can be addressed, or at least prevented in the future. We've done some terrible things since 9/11 as a nation, and a lot of it is because of the failure of the media to do investigative journalism. And we talked earlier about, and this suit has to do with the failure of the FBI to do their job.
Right.
But the Fourth Estate, our free press, is laughable as far as them doing a proper job. If it wasn't for the alternative media, the truth wouldn't get out there. So that's why people, our listeners, should consider supporting this litigation at lc4911.org because this will assist in reversing the trend that you're talking about. And it already has, because it's never been done before. We're stepping out in uncharted territory, and we're willing to do that. And we would appreciate as much support as we can get while we do that. And as they say to the cops, give us a code 5. Well, that means a backup. All right. Thank you.
Code 5.
Could I kind of just mention one other thing? The removal of the evidence after the attacks that kind of got carted away pretty quickly.
Well, it did, and we've talked on about that. That is something that policemen and firemen would be very careful to preserve the scene because there's evidence that has to be identified and examined and memorialized. So if you're going to remove it, you want to make sure it's examined because it tells you in some ways what happened. So in particular, the metal would tell you probably that it was impossible. The explanation that the 9/11 Commission gave of fires or office fires caused by jet fuel because of the shape of the metal, how distorted it was and how perforated it was or how sulfated it was, the indication that extremely high temperatures were involved. And the fire department would be, for spoliation reasons, be checking that evidence. And they would, this type of catastrophe would be called a catastrophe. They would be examining for explosives and for incendiaries and accelerants, things of that nature. And the common things like the dust samples, I'm sure that they would think that to gather some of that concrete that was obliterated and pulverized, that's unlike anything that a normal collapse of a building would cause. And it showered all of lower Manhattan. But no, you're right to point that out, that there's some mystery as to why that happened, and maybe the grand jury could get to that. We've outlined certain areas there of persons of material information, and certainly the cleanup crews would be one that you'd want to talk to and find out what they did exactly and whose orders were giving them that authority to do whatever they did, and what happened to the remains that they dealt with. How did they section off the crime scene, etc. So it's a good question, and it's a question that hopefully a grand jury can answer.
And so if I could ask, and this is to all three of you, do you think that you can get justice, like a fair trial that isn't rigged, for lack of a better word. Anybody?
Well, let me start, and my colleagues can join. This is Mick. There are a lot of folks who are sort of jaded about the U.S. justice system because of 9/11 and because of other issues over the years. I've been a public interest lawyer for 26 years plus now, and I'm not as jaded. People might be surprised by that, but you do occasionally get a case where you have to wonder, how the decision came down the way it did. And I've had a few, but for my whistleblower cases, I've won a number of those and settled a number of those, probably in the 90%, 95% range of a positive outcome on those whistleblower cases. They're kind of a unique type of case, but they're also quite controversial often, depending on what the whistleblower was disclosing. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic that we're going to get a fair, objective, correct decision in this FBI lawsuit. And I can't predict what a judge would do or court would do, but I am fairly confident that we're going to win this case. All we have to do for each of these 7 counts is prove 4 things to win. One, that the evidence relates to 9/11, which is sort of a no-brainer for what we've been talking about. Second requirement is that the original 9/11 Commission did not consider the evidence, also pretty apparent from the record for each of these categories. The third thing is that the new 9/11 Commission did not consider the evidence, and we also have to show, and that's also apparent from the new Commission's report. And then the last thing is that the FBI was aware of the evidence. And if you read through our complaint, you realize that we have FBI documents showing that most of this evidence is in the FBI's hands. There are actually FBI records on it. And on the demolition count, the FBI was referred to Richard Gage's work and actually sent a letter back twice acknowledging it. So, I think we're going to win it.
Because, it takes, it just sounds, from just like what I've heard in the discussions and our interview right now, media and all the people that have to kind of, be in on allowing the truth to kind of not really have been brought forth thus far, and so, right, like you guys need a lot of public support and a lot of pressure because, the people in power are just going to keep getting away with things and doing things as long as they're able to without the people, really pushing back.
Well, you're right about that. And in addition to what Mick said, and I agree with him. I think that the timing is right now for whatever reason, and that everything has to be looked within a historical context. There is a wakening up of the people slowly, but I think it's happening. It may have, because of the shock method, it may have taken this long, but I think we'll get some breaks somewhere. I think we'll get some people, if they see us being as persistent as we are and stepping out, there'll be other people inside that hopefully will respect that. And maybe they'll share some information that nobody knows. And there may be some judges that agree with us, and as the information gets out there, more and more law enforcement and more military and more and more prosecutors.
Yeah.
And as it builds the base of the average person will things that at one time seemed outlandish, or as people say, conspiracy theorists will say that, oh, I knew that. We know that the government is corrupt, or in a general way, or there's problems. And I just want to clarify too that the government, there's a lot of good. Most people that work in government are wonderful people. They're Americans. They have a good job just like anyone else. But there are people that take advantage of situations, that can get into controlling positions. And there's always rogue elements in just about any organization. So the question is then how to deal with those rogue elements if they're involved in the situation. And the way to do that is, to me, is right now is to do these actions and get to the truth. As you started to show up, give me a little truth.
Yeah.
That's what we want. And if the timing is right, and we need a little maybe spiritual guidance or blessings,
Yeah.
and the people wake up a bit, I think we can address a lot of these problems, and we can say mea culpa, mea maxima culpa for all these terrible things we've done, like Iraq and etc. And this war on terror will be now something that we solve, because it's really a problem with ourselves. Once we get ourselves straight, there will be no war on terror. We'll know who the bad guys are, and our justice system will take care of those bad guys.
Right. I mean, it's all about holding people in power accountable. I mean, they shouldn't be. It shouldn't be so difficult to hold people in power accountable.
Oh, yes, it is.
As it's right.
Because they wouldn't be in positions of power if they hadn't been held accountable all the way up the pyramid. That's the way the pyramid works.
Yeah.
I would like to give one last big picture, and that is people need to understand. When you read our grand jury petition, and you can read that at both the Architects and Engineers website and the Lawyers Committee website, LC4, the lawsuit against the FBI and the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, that was filed yesterday by Mick and the Lawyers Committee. And then you can read both of those at the Architects and Engineers website and the Lawyers Committee website. When you read them, you will understand that it is the official story of who attacked our country on 9/11 and killed almost 3,000 innocent people. That they are still at large.
Right.
They are still dangerous. They still need to be identified, and they still need to be brought to justice. And they are out there. There has been no accountability, and until there is, they can do it again.
Yeah. And right, they're getting more momentum. The longer they get away with it, the more momentum and brazen they become.
That's why we're doing what we're doing, and we will never give up.
Yeah, you guys need a lot of support. I know that press conference yesterday, I think it was not really well promoted. We need.
Actually, it was,
Okay.
but we were up against the Barr letter and the Mueller report having just been released. There was no way there was going to be mainstream media doing anything else that day.
Hopefully when the next one comes, there'll be thousands of people that turn out for it.
Well, there could be if we get into court, because that hopefully will be a public proceeding. We can stack the gallery.
And so people can follow the dates and things when is the court actually gonna take place?
Well, that's a good question for Mick. I was asked that question today, Mick, in an email. Is there any time requirement for the court to respond to us?
Well, there's a set procedure. It's not a set timeline. So the first thing that happens is the government has to respond to our complaint and either answer paragraph by paragraph what we allege, which will be a very interesting document to read, or if they choose, if they have some technical legal theory that they think would be a basis for dismissing our case, they can file a motion to dismiss instead. At that point, there is a briefing schedule set. Both sides file their briefs on the technical issues, and then the judge would have a reasonable time, and there is no set time in the rules, to decide the motion. Once that motion was decided, and we do expect to survive a motion to dismiss, the next normal procedure, particularly for cases like this, under the Administrative Procedures Act, is you have a summary judgment briefing. The distinction is that motions for summary judgment deal with facts at issue and evidence, whereas a motion to dismiss does not deal with any facts or evidence. A motion to dismiss actually assumes the facts in the complaint to be true and still argues a technical basis for dismissal. But if we get to the summary judgment stage, which we expect to happen in a few months, the evidence gets addressed, the facts get addressed. And in this case, important for everyone to understand, we have no burden to prove any particular theory of events of what happened on 9/11. We don't even have a burden to prove that the evidence that we're referencing is correct or valid. What we have to prove is that the evidence exists, it's known to the FBI, it relates to 9/11, and it has not been assessed by the commissions, which is why I think we're going to win on that basis.
So the bottom line for the first part is there is no explicit deadline for the judge, presumably for the court, whatever official,
Right.
to respond to our complaint for the government to respond with a motion to dismiss, or for the judge to take an action. We just have to wait.
No deadline. Well, we do have to wait, and everyone does if for all litigation, but there will be presumably a hearing at some point. The hearings are public, the filings are public. Folks can follow the progress of the case on the PACER, Public Access to Court Electronic Records. Just sign up and get an account, which is free. If you want to download, you'll have to pay a few bucks for big documents and less for smaller documents. You can actually follow each filing, all of which are public.
And what if the court does not respond? Do we have to file a mandamus after X number of months?
I don't have any doubt the court will respond on this case.
Okay.
I actually just read the court's standing order. The particular judge has been assigned, and it seems that his procedures are very, very diligent. And this judge and many judges do actually discourage motions to extend time.
Okay.
I don't expect delay. I think you're going to see progress here.
Do you know?
And what is the name of the judge? Do you
Yeah, I
know
was
that?
just going to ask you.
I have it, but I don't have it in my memory.
All right.
And it's going to be in D.C. Is that where the court will take place?
Yes,
Yeah.
in Washington, D.C.
Bummer. And it won't
I'm going to have to leave, Pat. It's we've been an hour and 20 minutes. I do have an appointment.
Okay. I guess we'll wrap it up unless anybody has any pending last comments to say.
Well, Kat, could I add one last thing?
Sure. Add a couple if you need to.
Well,
Thank you.
Appreciate that. It's Mick. I just wanted to follow up on two things. One is your point about World Trade Center 7 being a smoking gun, and your question and Dave's answer on the evidence that's been prematurely carted away and either destroyed or concealed at Ground Zero on 9/11 and shortly thereafter. And the two are connected. And I just wanted to point out that Building 7, once a judge or the Congress or the FBI embraces the unavoidable scientific evidence of demolition of Building 7 by use of explosives, and if you just watch the building come down on the video on the web, you can pretty much see there was no other explanation. Once you get to that point, and that's the sort of smoking gun aspect people talk about, but there's another smoking gun aspect that follows on. And that is, once you get to the point of embracing the scientific evidence and you recognize that building was destroyed by explosives, then you have to start asking other troublesome questions. You, the FBI, you, the grand jury, or a federal court that has to deal with eventually the merits, or the Congress. And one of those troubling questions is, why did this building come down late in the afternoon, hours after the towers collapsed, and not having been hit by an airplane? And once you know it was explosives that brought it down, then you have to ask, well, if it was going to be destroyed by explosives, why wasn't it destroyed by explosives at 10 o'clock or 9:30 or 10:30? And there are important, and the answer to those questions are going to turn out to be very important about what did and didn't happen and who was responsible. And once people start asking those questions, particularly people with subpoena power, like a grand jury, the FBI, or Congress, progress can be made.
And what about Larry Silverstein actually using the words, we're going to pull it?
Well, that's been on the web. I have no immediate comment on that.
Oh.
And I would recommend my colleagues not have comment on it either, but I leave that to them. We have taken no position as a lawyers committee, but obviously Mr. Silverstein, who had the lease on the trade centers just before 9/11, is someone that may have information of interest to the grand jury.
right. Like also, suing Larry Silverstein might be, again, I don't know, down the road or included in this lawsuit or something. If he has anything to do with it. And I just kind of wanted to add, or to also kind of clarify on what you just said, that term incendiaries. So that's like an explosive accelerant, isn't it?
Well, it has a technical definition. I believe an incendiary is something that creates fire rather than technical explosions. And if you, depending on how you configure certain high-tech material like nanothermite or nanothermate, you can configure it to be explosive, or you
Okay.
configure it to be incendiary, which basically means it cuts quickly through steel, and it can be configured for both purposes. So that's why we try to say explosives and or incendiaries.
Right.
They can also be put together. That's why we do the and or throughout the petition and the FBI lawsuit filed yesterday.
Right. Because of the extent of the fires afterward that burned until what, Christmas, I think?
For 3 months. For
right.
3 months till December.
Right. So that's that. I mean, there's a lot of smoking guns, like you said. Okay. So again, the websites are LC, the number 4, 9.
No, FOR.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah.
Terribly sorry. Okay. So LCFOR 911.org and
right.
and AE911Truth.org.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
That's all.
Barbara Honecker.
Thank you very much, Kat.
Dave Meiswinkle and Mick Harrison, both attorneys for Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Dave. Thank you.
Bye, Kat. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mick. Thank you. I'll be in touch. I got to keep in touch and keep on top of this stuff.
Good job. Thanks.
Let me know when anything's happening in New York.
All right.
It will be. Don't worry. We just don't know yet.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Okay, have a good night. Okay, so I guess that wraps it up. March to 26th. I kind of cut it down to doing the show every other week. I'm just going to read, now that I can get to my YouTube channel. It's hard to. I'm just going to read some of the people that commented. Tom Tapp, TAPP. Remember the Inspector General during 9/11. His lies were foundational to the war in Iraq. Remember what he said about the flight headed to the Pentagon. And then he says, where are those cell phone records? FBI never released them because I don't believe they existed. So I don't know what, or don't remember, or maybe I heard it and I forgot what Inspector General said about the flight headed to the Pentagon. So if Tom can maybe write in what that was. And then Stop the NWO 2012, which is New World Order, wrote, hello, Mossad set the bombs, Israel and PNAC, the project for a new American century. And people just need to look up this stuff and, do your own research. I mean, there's, I'm like a fitness person. I talk about fitness all the time. I can't help it because, it like I always felt like it was needed. I always felt like the people didn't have like a kind of certain level of fitness. They never challenged. People in power always kind of went unchallenged. I saw it for decades, which is why I always had this undying need to kind of set a higher bar and move at least in the direction of like being healthier and fitter as a society. Nobody, because they have power, should be have impunity. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I was saying that decades ago, because everybody always used to just make excuses for the abuser and basically enable them to continue on doing what they were doing. And this is what, literally 5 decades of doing that has created. David Thomas says, Trump knows about 9/11. He knows about paradise. I don't know what paradise is, and chemtrails. And we have to find different ways of pushing back because nothing else has worked. I mean, I don't know. I think people should like stop paying taxes. I mean, I know, again, like maybe I set like this high bar of fitness, like I because I just can't help it. Like I have been trying to get people to like really push and dig deep within themselves, because I mean, the bottom line is we have to. Let me move, I guess, in front. I'm always like staying over to the side so I could stay out of the way so people could see the guests. Now that my guests are gone, I could turn off the larger monitor. Hold on just very quickly. Just wanted to turn on a quick light here. So, I mean, this is all just a basic health issue. That's what comes down to. Warning, someone says, warning, 3 exclamation points, Angela Merkel and the Kalergi plan. That's who is making this statement. Stay strong, American brothers and sisters from Denmark. Thank you so much. The Scandinavian countries like Iceland that actually jailed their criminal bankers. Thank you for that vote of support there. And she also says, it looks like a female in the picture, find those military jammers Mossad used to maximize the American death toll of the Israel terror attack on 9/11. The New York police still have 4 or 5 Mossad radio jammers in custody to this day. And she also says, insist on the release of images from the Pentagon. That is key. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like smoking guns. I mean, those 5 dancing Israelis, for sure. There's certain things I didn't want to bring up with the lawyers from the 9/11 inquiry, because you can't. I mean, like they're focused on certain things, but the attack on the USS Liberty is something that people need to be talking about more. I mean, like, because this is real stuff. These are real incidences. I've interviewed 2 of the survivors, one of which, Joe Meters, who, again, just this past June was one of the participants on the Freedom Flotilla to Gaza, was on the last leg, so I mean, this is real stuff. And before these people all die and there's none of them left, come on. I mean, again, like fitness, I've been trying to get people to be fit. Spine, step up to the plate. I mean, there are healthy and fit ways of functioning in life. And then there are dysfunctional and, not fit and healthy ways, ill, sick ways of functioning in life. And, being an enabler and being dysfunctional and a codependent. I mean, I've like been studying dysfunctional abusive relationships all my life. And, and now it's on this like massive scale. And it's important to be healthy and fit in life on all levels, or else you're just going to live in this and be leaving your children and grandchildren. Like most people don't care because, hey, the kids are here to foot the bill anyway. This is why I've been like protesting about child abuse since the 70s, because I mean, how is not the issue of child abuse not a glaring sign that the most innocent and vulnerable are just here to pick up the bill? Like, I mean, nobody gives a shit. Like, the vulnerable are vulnerable, so they can't do anything, so let's just shit on them. I mean, that's how, and we're living in that on a mass scale. The most vulnerable, defenseless countries, poorest countries on the face of the earth are the ones that get pulverized and exterminated. So thank you for tuning in. And I will try to do an interview with them again in the not so distant future. Speak truth to power. It's your right. Peace.